Jake Morrison sat in the cold metal chair and watched the alien delegates cast their votes. The massive chamber of the Galactic Council stretched out before him like a giant bowl made of gleaming white stone. Thousands of seats rose up in perfect circles around the central speaking platform where the council speaker stood. Most of those seats were empty today because this vote was not important enough for most species to attend. The Valdari delegate raised one of her 4 arms. Her skin glowed with a soft blue light that pulsed gently as she spoke in her musical voice. The Valdari Collective votes no on Human Petition 2847C. Her large black eyes never looked toward Jake as she spoke. To her, he was just another primitive species asking for things they had not earned. The Krex Empire delegate slammed his armored fist on his voting panel. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. His red eyes burned with contempt as he growled through his translator device. The Krex Empire finds this petition laughable. Humans lack the military strength and cultural development required for equal representation. We vote no. His massive frame shifted in his specially reinforced chair as he turned away from Jake completely. Ancient Memory of Stars spoke for the Zephyrian Collective in his whisper-quiet voice that somehow carried perfectly through the chamber. His ancient face showed no emotion as he delivered his words like a judge pronouncing a death sentence. The collective has considered this petition for the required 37 days. We find insufficient evidence that humanity has achieved the necessary technological and social advancement. We vote no. Council Speaker Harmony Prime of the Eternal Void floated above the central platform in her containment field. Her energy form shifted colors as she announced the results. Human Petition 2847C for equal representation in the Galactic Council has been denied by unanimous vote of all present delegates. This marks the 3rd such petition denied in the past 2 standard years. The Council notes that humanity may submit another petition after the standard waiting period of 18 months. Jake Morrison did not stand up immediately. He sat quietly and looked around the chamber one more time. 3 years ago, he had walked into this same chamber filled with hope and excitement. Earth had finally made contact with galactic civilization. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe. They had so much to offer and so much to learn from the great species that ruled the stars. But 3 years of diplomatic service had taught Jake Morrison some hard truths about the galaxy. The great species did not want partners. They wanted servants. They wanted humanity to provide resources and labor and innovation while accepting a place at the bottom of their social order. They wanted humans to be grateful for scraps from their table. Jake had watched human scientists solve problems that had puzzled Valdari researchers for centuries. He had seen human engineers repair Krex warships using methods their own technicians could not understand. He had observed human doctors develop treatments for diseases that Zephyrian medicine had declared incurable. But every time humans asked for recognition or equal treatment, the answer was always the same. You are not ready. You have not proven yourselves. You must wait and continue to serve. The council speaker was already moving on to the next item of business when Jake Morrison finally stood up. He buttoned his simple blue suit jacket and picked up his leather briefcase. The few alien delegates who noticed him at all probably expected him to make some angry speech or desperate plea. Humans were known for their emotional outbursts when things did not go their way. Instead, Jake Morrison simply nodded once toward the council speaker, a brief dip of his head that lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. His footsteps echoed softly on the polished stone floor. The sound seemed very loud in the huge chamber, but none of the aliens paid any attention to it. Jake walked through the long corridors of the council building without stopping, past the offices where human staff members worked to support the delegates, of species that looked down on them, past the meeting rooms where human experts provided advice that alien officials would later claim as their own ideas, past the cafeteria where human food had become popular among many species, even though humans themselves were not welcome at most tables. Security guards nodded to Jake as he passed. Most of them were human, because the job paid poorly and involved long hours of boring work that other species did not want. The aliens were happy to let humans handle their security as long as humans knew their place and did not ask for advancement or recognition. Jake reached his office and sat down at his desk. He opened his secure communication device and typed a single message. Petition denied. Proceeding with option 7. He sent the message to every human facility in Council space. Research stations, military outposts, trade centers, diplomatic offices, and private businesses run by human civilians who had followed their governments into space. Within minutes, the replies began coming back. Message received. Beginning shutdown. Procedures. Understood. Initiating withdrawal protocol. Copy that. Starting evacuation sequence. Each response was professional and calm. No anger or frustration. Just quiet acknowledgement that it was time to go. Dr. Lisa Carter received the message while she was working in her laboratory on Harmony Station. She had been trying to develop a cure for Zephyrian genetic degradation syndrome for 8 months. Her research was showing promising results, and she estimated she was only weeks away from a breakthrough. The Zephyrian researchers working with her had no idea how close they were to success because they did not understand human intuitive leaps in scientific thinking. Lisa saved all her research files to her personal storage device. Then she carefully deleted every trace of her work from the station computers. She packed her equipment and her personal belongings into shipping containers. Her Zephyrian colleagues watched in confusion as she prepared to leave. They asked her many questions, but she just smiled and told them she had been reassigned. She did not mention that humanity was leaving Council space entirely. Captain Ryan Hayes got the message while his fleet was patrolling the border between Council space and the dangerous regions where pirates and raiders operated. His ships had been protecting Krex colonies for 6 months without losing a single world to enemy attack. The Krex military commanders praised his tactical skills, but made it clear that humans would never be allowed to advance beyond the role of support troops. Ryan ordered his fleet to return to base immediately. When the Krex commanders demanded an explanation, he told them only that his ships were needed elsewhere. He did not tell them that elsewhere meant human space beyond the borders of the Council. He did not warn them that without human early warning, systems and tactical support, their border defenses would collapse within weeks. All across Council space, the pattern repeated itself. Humans quietly finished their work, packed their belongings, and left. They did not announce their departure or explain their reasons. They simply disappeared as silently as they had arrived 3 years earlier. The great species of the galaxy barely noticed them go. 6 months after the humans disappeared from Council space, the first problems began to show themselves. Commander Vex Prime of the Krex Empire stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared at the tactical display with growing frustration. His fleet of 12 heavy cruisers was supposed to be crushing the small pirate force that had dared to attack Krex supply convoys near the Outer Rim territories. Instead, his ships were being picked apart by an enemy that should have been destroyed in the first hour of battle. The pirates were using old human-designed fighters that moved in patterns Vex Prime could not predict. Every time he tried to position his ships for a killing blow, the enemy would vanish into the asteroid field and reappear somewhere else entirely. "How are they doing this?" Vex Prime growled to his tactical officer. "Our sensors show only 37. Small craft against our superior firepower. They should be running in terror or floating dead in space." The tactical officer's red eyes glowed with embarrassment as he admitted the truth. "Sir, they are using human scanning techniques that we do not understand. Our sensors cannot track them properly when they move through the asteroid field. The human advisors who used to help us with these situations are no longer available." Vex Prime slammed his armored fist against his command chair. For months, the Krex military had been telling themselves that they did not need human support. Humans were weak creatures who hid behind technology instead of fighting with honor. But now Vex Prime was beginning to understand that human technology was not just advanced machinery. It was a completely different way of thinking about warfare. The humans had taught Krex officers to look for patterns in enemy movement and to think several steps ahead of their opponents. They had shown Krex tacticians how to use terrain and timing to multiply their advantage over numerically superior forces. Most importantly, they had developed scanning methods that could track enemy ships even when traditional sensors failed. Without human advisors, the Krex Empire was fighting blind against enemies who had learned human tactics from captured databases and stolen equipment. 3 more Krex colonies had fallen to pirate raids in the past month because the Empire could no longer protect its extended territories. Meanwhile, on the medical research station, Harmony, synthesis of calm waters, struggled with the genetic data that Dr. Lisa Carter had left behind. The Valdari scientist had spent 2 months trying to understand the human approach to genetic therapy, but every experiment ended in failure. The research files were complete and detailed, but they were written in a style that made no sense to Valdari. Thinking. Dr. Carter had made intuitive leaps in her analysis that bypassed normal scientific method. She had tested combinations of genetic markers that seemed random but somehow produced positive results. Most confusing of all, she had used statistical models that violated Valdari mathematical principles but still worked perfectly. Synthesis of Calm Waters had requested help from the finest Valdari geneticists in Council space, but none of them could explain how Dr. Carter's methods functioned. The human scientist had been only weeks away from curing Zephyrian genetic degradation syndrome when she disappeared. Now that cure seemed as distant as ever. The Zephyrian collective was beginning to feel desperate about their genetic crisis. Their birth rates had been dropping for 3 centuries as accumulated genetic damage made it harder for their species to reproduce successfully. Dr. Carter's research had offered the first real hope they had seen in generations. Without her, their entire civilization faced slow extinction. On the trade station New Prosperity, Administrator Floating Thought of Commerce watched cargo ships arrive and depart with growing concern. The station had been one of the busiest commercial hubs in Council space when Amanda Price managed its logistics operations. The human trader had developed supply chain systems that kept goods flowing smoothly between 17 different star systems. Amanda had understood something that other species missed about interstellar commerce. Trade was not just about moving cargo from one place to another. It was about predicting what different worlds would need before they knew they needed it. It was about finding creative solutions when shipping routes were blocked or when political tensions disrupted normal trade patterns. Without Amanda's management, the trade networks were breaking down like clockwork mechanisms missing their key components. Floating Thought of Commerce tried to maintain the old routes, but he could not adapt to changing conditions the way Amanda had. When a solar storm disrupted shipping in the Kepler sector, he waited 3 weeks for the storm to pass instead of finding alternate routes. Food shortages were spreading across 6 agricultural colonies because the complex distribution system Amanda had created was failing without her constant adjustments. Medical supplies were piling up unused on some worlds, while other colonies ran out of basics, medicines. The Valdari had always prided themselves on their logical approach to commerce, but they were learning that human intuition was more valuable than they had realized. The problems were not limited to military defeats and trade disruptions. Environmental disasters were beginning to strike worlds that had depended on human expertise to maintain their ecological balance. The terraformed moon of Epsilon 7 was experiencing massive crop failures because the agricultural systems designed by human engineer Pete Johnson were breaking down. Pete had created a delicate balance between imported earth crops and native vegetation that provided food for 2 million colonists. But his replacement, a Krex agricultural specialist named Ironclaw of the Fertile Soil, had decided to optimize the system using traditional Krex farming methods. Within 3 months, the soil chemistry had become toxic to both Earth and native plants. Similar disasters were occurring throughout Council space, as alien specialists tried to maintain systems they did not fully understand. Climate control networks failed on orbital habitats because the backup protocols were written in human, technical language that other species could not interpret properly. Power distribution grids overloaded when alien engineers bypassed safety systems that seemed unnecessary until they were needed. Council Speaker Harmony Prime of the Eternal Void received daily reports about these growing problems, but she refused to admit that they were connected to humanity's departure. The Council had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years before humans arrived. They would adapt to these temporary difficulties and prove that they did not need help from primitive species. But privately, the Council Speaker was beginning to review the files about human contributions to galactic civilization. The records showed a pattern that disturbed her energy patterns. In every field where humans had been involved, their departure had left gaps that could not be easily filled. It was as if humanity had woven itself into the fabric of Council society so thoroughly that removing them had weakened the entire structure. 2 years had passed since humanity vanished from Council space and the galaxy was burning. Council Speaker Harmony Prime of the Eternal Void floated in her emergency command chamber, watching dozens of red warning lights flash across the tactical display. Each light represented a crisis that threatened the stability of galactic civilization. The Shadow Fleet had appeared 6 months ago at the edge of Council space, like a nightmare emerging from the void between stars. Hundreds of black robotic ships moved in perfect formation toward inhabited worlds, destroying everything in their path. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted. They did not respond to communication attempts, and they showed no mercy to any living beings they encountered. Admiral Thunderstrike of the Storm Winds led the combined Council fleet against the Shadow Fleet in the Battle of Proxima Gate. His force of 300 warships from all 3 major species should have been able to defeat any enemy in the galaxy. Instead, they suffered the worst military defeat in recorded galactic history. The Shadow Fleet ships moved like dancers performing a deadly ballet. They anticipated every tactical maneuver the Council forces attempted and countered with devastating precision. Their weapons cut through Council shields like knives through paper, and their armor seemed to absorb energy blasts without taking damage. "How are they predicting our movements?" Admiral Thunderstrike demanded of his tactical staff after his flagship barely escaped the slaughter. "Every time we try to outflank them, they are already waiting for us. Every time we concentrate our firepower, they disperse before we can target them effectively." His Valdari tactical advisor, Chorus of Strategic Thought, provided the answer that chilled everyone on the bridge. "Sir, the enemy appears to be using advanced pattern recognition algorithms similar to those developed by human Admiral Steve Parker. They are not just reacting to our attacks, they are predicting what we will do before we do it." Admiral Steve Parker had revolutionized Council military doctrine during his 3 years of service. He had taught alien officers to think like their enemies and to anticipate multiple possible outcomes from every tactical decision. Most importantly, he had developed electromagnetic pulse weapons specifically designed to disable robotic opponents. But Steve Parker was gone along with all the other humans, and his knowledge had left with him. The Council forces were fighting with outdated tactics against an enemy that used their own superior methods against them. Worse yet, the electromagnetic pulse weapons that could have crippled the Shadow Fleet were stored in human-controlled facilities that had been abandoned 2 years earlier. The military disasters were only part of the growing crisis facing Council civilization. Environmental catastrophe was spreading across the core worlds as planetary systems designed by human scientists collapsed without proper maintenance. The garden world of Kepler 442b was dying because Valdari ecologists could not understand the terraforming protocols developed by Dr. Maya Johnson. Maya had spent 5 years creating a perfect balance between imported and native species on Kepler 442b. Her ecosystem supported 4 billion Valdari colonists and produced enough food to export to 6 neighboring systems. But her replacement, Harmony of Growing Things, had decided to improve the system by introducing more efficient Valdari agricultural techniques. Within 18 months, the planetary ecosystem had entered a death spiral that no one could stop. The soil bacteria that Maya had carefully cultivated were dying off because the new farming methods disrupted their delicate chemical balance. Native plant species were going extinct as imported fertilizers poisoned the groundwater they depended on. 3 billion Valdari refugees had already fled Kepler 442b as the planet became uninhabitable. They crowded into refugee camps on other worlds, straining resources that were already stretched thin by trade disruptions and supply chain failures. The Valdari government faced riots and political upheaval as their people demanded answers that no one could provide. The technological infrastructure of council space was also beginning to fail without human maintenance and innovation. Dr. Ben Thompson had been developing faster-than-light communication arrays that would have revolutionized galactic coordination by allowing instantaneous contact between star systems. His research had promised to solve the communication delays that made governing a galactic civilization so difficult. But Ben Thompson was gone, and his research had been abandoned when Zephyrian scientists could not understand his theoretical framework. The communication project had been based on human insights into quantum entanglement that violated Zephyrian physics principles. Without those insights, the project collapsed, and Council worlds returned to using outdated communication methods that took days or weeks to transmit messages across interstellar distances. The communication failures meant that Council leaders often learned about crises weeks after they had begun. By the time relief supplies reached disaster areas, the situations had usually grown much worse. By the time military reinforcements arrived at threatened worlds, the Shadow Fleet had already moved on to attack other targets. Perhaps most critically, the early warning systems that protected Council space from external threats had gone silent. The monitoring stations scattered along the galactic rim still functioned, but without human pattern recognition, specialists like Commander Kate Sullivan, the data they collected was useless. The alien technicians who replaced the human staff could read the sensor displays, but they could not interpret what the information meant. Kate Sullivan had possessed an almost supernatural ability to spot patterns in seemingly random data. She could look at sensor readings from 50 monitoring stations and immediately identify which signals indicated real threats versus natural phenomena or equipment malfunctions. Her reports had provided Council leaders with advance warning of the Shadow Fleet incursion, but her warnings had been ignored because alien analysts could not confirm her conclusions. Now the monitoring stations continued to detect dozens of potential threats entering Council space, but no one could determine which signals represented actual dangers. The Zephyrian analysts spent weeks studying each sensor reading, while Valdari specialists demanded more detailed scans of every anomaly. Meanwhile, real threats moved deeper into Council territory without being detected until they struck inhabited worlds. Trade networks that had taken centuries to develop were collapsing as merchant captains could no longer navigate the complex web of regulations and customs requirements that different worlds imposed. Amanda Price had memorized the trade laws of 47 different systems and knew exactly which permits were needed to transport specific types of cargo between any two planets in Council space. Without Amanda's expertise, cargo ships spent weeks in port waiting for clearance to proceed to their destinations. Perishable goods spoiled in storage, while essential supplies sat in warehouses because the proper paperwork had not been filed correctly. Some merchants gave up on Council space entirely and began trading with the independent systems beyond the galactic rim, where regulations were simpler and bureaucracy was less oppressive. The Council faced a crisis that threatened the very foundation of their civilization. 3 major species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia were being defeated by problems that 3 years earlier would have been solved quickly with human assistance. But pride and arrogance prevented them from admitting that they needed help from the primitive species they had dismissed so casually. The Shadow Fleet reached the outer defenses of Nexus Prime on a cold morning when three suns cast long shadows across the capital world of the Galactic Council. Council Speaker Harmony Prime of the Eternal Void watched from her emergency bunker as black robotic ships destroyed the massive defense platforms that had protected the system for 1,000 years. Each defense platform had cost more than most planets produced in a decade and mounted weapons that could shatter moons. But the Shadow Fleet ships moved through the defensive fire like it was nothing more than gentle rain. Their dark hulls absorbed energy blasts that should have vaporized them instantly, and their return fire cut through Council shields like they were made of paper. "How long until they reach the planet?" Harmony Prime asked her military advisor, General Stone Fist of War. The Krex general's red eyes burned with shame as he delivered his report. "At their current speed, they will be in orbit within 6 hours. Our remaining defense fleet cannot stop them. We have lost 60% of our ships, and the survivors are retreating to the inner system." Harmony Prime's energy form flickered, with colors that showed her growing desperation. 3 years ago, this crisis would have been solved by human Admiral Steve Parker and his brilliant tactical mind. Steve would have found some clever way to turn the enemy's strengths against them, or discovered a weakness that no one else could see. But Steve Parker was gone, and with him all hope of military victory. "What about the electromagnetic pulse weapons that the humans developed?" Harmony Prime asked. "Could we use those against the robotic ships?" General Stonefist shook his massive head in frustration. "The humans took all their advanced weapons when they left Council space. We have tried to reverse engineer their technology from abandoned equipment, but we do not understand the principles behind their designs. Our scientists say the weapons work on theoretical foundations that contradict our understanding of physics. The truth was that human weapons were not just advanced technology. They were the product of a completely different approach to scientific thinking. Humans made intuitive leaps that allowed them to discover solutions that methodical alien research could never find. They combined theories from different fields in ways that seemed impossible, but somehow worked perfectly. The Council had always believed that their systematic approach to science was superior to human intuition and creativity. Now they were learning that there were problems that could not be solved through pure logic and careful analysis. Some challenges required the kind of innovative thinking that only humans seemed to possess. As the military situation grew hopeless, the Council made a desperate decision. They would send a secret diplomatic mission to human space to ask for help. The mission would be led by Ancient Memory of Stars, the most respected elder of the Zephyrian Collective. If anyone could convince humanity to assist their former oppressors, it would be him. Ancient Memory of Stars had lived for over 800 years and had seen the rise and fall of many galactic civilizations. He was one of the few Council leaders who had opposed the decision to deny humanity equal representation. He had recognized that humans possessed qualities that were rare and valuable, even if they could not be easily measured or understood. The diplomatic mission traveled in a small, stealth ship to avoid detection by Shadow Fleet patrols. They followed old navigation charts to the edge of Council space, and then beyond into the unknown regions where humanity had vanished 2 years earlier. What they found there shocked them more than anything they had expected. Human space was not a collection of struggling refugee colonies barely surviving in exile. Instead, it was a thriving civilization that had grown and prospered beyond anything the Council had imagined possible. Human worlds were green and beautiful with cities that gleamed like jewels under alien suns. Space stations hummed with activity as ships from dozens of species came and went, carrying goods and passengers. Most surprising of all, humanity had made contact with species that the Council had never encountered. The diplomatic mission observed trade negotiations between humans and crystalline beings that communicated through harmonic vibrations. They watched human scientists working alongside gaseous entities that existed in the upper atmospheres of gas giant planets. Captain Ryan Hayes now commanded a fleet of exploration ships that had mapped a quarter of the galaxy beyond Council borders. His vessels were more advanced than anything in the Council fleet and moved with a speed and grace that defied explanation. The ships were not just human designs, but incorporated technology learned from partnership with alien species that had chosen to work with humanity as equals. Dr. Lisa Carter had not only completed her cure for Zephyrian genetic degradation syndrome, but had developed treatments for diseases affecting 37 different species. Her research facility was staffed by scientists from a dozen worlds who shared their knowledge freely in pursuit of common goals. The breakthroughs they achieved together far exceeded anything that isolated Council research could accomplish. Amanda Price had established trade networks that connected human space with independent systems across half the galaxy. Her cargo ships carried goods and ideas between worlds that had never had contact with each other before. She had created prosperity not just for humanity, but for every species that chose to participate in her open and fair trading system. But the most shocking discovery came when the diplomatic mission learned about humanity's contact with the creators of the Shadow Fleet. The robotic armada that was destroying Council worlds was not an invasion force sent by some hostile alien empire. It was a malfunctioning terraforming fleet launched by a civilization that had died out millions of years ago. The robots had been programmed to prepare planets for colonization by their creators, but after millions of years, their programming had become corrupted. They now saw all existing life as obstacles to be cleared away before terraforming could begin. They were not evil conquerors, but broken machines following ancient orders that no longer made sense. Human negotiator Grace Martinez had made contact with the Shadow Fleet's central command systems using communication methods that combined human intuition with alien technology. She had begun the delicate process of reprogramming the fleet to assist in planetary restoration rather than destruction. The work was slow and dangerous, but progress was being made. Ancient Memory of Stars realized that humanity had not just survived their exile from Council space. They had thrived in ways that the Council could barely comprehend. They had created a new kind of galactic civilization based on cooperation and mutual respect, rather than hierarchy and dominance. They had solved problems that the Council could not even understand, let alone fix. The old Zephyrian looked out at the bustling human colonies and felt something he had not experienced in centuries. He felt hope that the galaxy could be something better than it had been. But he also felt the weight of his mission and the knowledge that his people were dying while he watched humanity flourish in freedom. Ancient Memory of Stars stood in the reception hall of the human diplomatic station and felt smaller than he had in 800 years of life. The building was simple and elegant, with walls made of some kind of translucent material that showed the stars beyond. Human Ambassador Jake Morrison walked toward him with the same quiet dignity he had shown when leaving the Council chambers 3 years earlier. "Ancient Memory of Stars," Jake said with a respectful bow. "Welcome to New Geneva Station. I understand you have traveled a long way to speak with us." The old Zephyrian's voice carried the weight of his entire civilization when he replied. "Ambassador Morrison, I come bearing a message from the Galactic Council. We request your assistance in stopping the Shadow Fleet before they destroy our remaining worlds." Jake Morrison's expression did not change as he gestured toward a comfortable chair. "Please sit down. I imagine you have much to tell me about the situation in Council space. We have been monitoring some of the transmissions, but we would like to hear the full story." Ancient Memory of Stars settled into the chair and began to speak. He told Jake about the military defeats and the environmental disasters. He described the communication failures and the trade disruptions that were tearing Council civilization apart. He explained how the Shadow Fleet had appeared from nowhere and seemed unstoppable with conventional weapons. "We know that your people developed electromagnetic pulse weapons that could disable robotic enemies," the Zephyrian elder said. We also know that you have made contact with the Shadow Fleet and begun reprogramming their systems. The Council is prepared to offer you anything you want in exchange for your help." Jake Morrison listened to the entire report without interrupting. When Ancient Memory of Stars finished speaking, Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward and asked a simple question. "What exactly is the Council offering us?" Ancient Memory of Stars had prepared for this moment during his long journey to human space. The Council offers full membership with equal representation. Humans would have the same voting rights as the other three major species. You would be granted access to all Council technology and research. Your people would be welcomed back to their former positions with increased authority and better compensation. Jake Morrison smiled sadly and shook his head. "Ancient Memory of Stars, I think you misunderstand the situation. Humanity is not interested in rejoining the Council or returning to Council space. We have built something better here." The Zephyrian elder felt his heart sink as he realized that his mission might fail. "Then what would you want in exchange for saving our civilization?" "We want nothing from the Council," Jake replied. "But we are willing to help you anyway, because that is who we are. However, we will not help you rebuild the same system that created this crisis in the first place. If you want our assistance, you must be willing to accept a completely different approach to galactic governance." Jake Morrison stood up and walked to the window that showed the busy space lanes around New Geneva Station. Ships from 40 different species moved through the system carrying goods and passengers. The traffic was coordinated not by rigid regulations, but by cooperative agreements that worked because everyone benefited from them. "Look out there," Jake said. "Do you see any enforcement fleets or border patrols? Do you see any species being treated as inferior or superior to others? Every ship in this system is here because they chose to be here and because they gained something from participating in our community." Ancient Memory of Stars joined Jake at the window and observed the peaceful activity outside. He could see that this was indeed different from Council space, where military patrols enforced regulations and species were ranked in strict hierarchies. Here, cooperation seemed to flow naturally from mutual benefit rather than being imposed by force or law. "What you have created is impressive," the Zephyrian admitted. "But how would this apply to the crisis we face? The Shadow Fleet will not be stopped by cooperative agreements and mutual benefit." Jake Morrison turned back to face his guest. "Actually, that is exactly how we have been stopping them. Our negotiator, Grace Martinez, has been communicating with the Shadow Fleet's command systems. She has learned that they are not evil invaders but broken machines following corrupted programming. We have been slowly repairing their code and redirecting them toward constructive purposes." Ancient Memory of Stars felt hope stirring in his ancient heart. "You mean the Shadow Fleet could be turned into allies rather than enemies?" "More than allies," Jake replied. "They could become partners in healing the damage that has been done to the galaxy. Their terraforming technology could restore the worlds that have been devastated by war and environmental collapse. Their manufacturing systems could provide resources for reconstruction. Their exploration protocols could help us map and understand the regions beyond our current borders." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent message from the communication center. The Shadow Fleet had reached Nexus Prime and was beginning its assault on the planet's surface. Council Speaker Harmony Prime of the Eternal Void was requesting immediate assistance from any source that could provide it. Jake Morrison looked at Ancient Memory of Stars with a serious expression. "We can stop the attack on your homeworld today. But if we do it our way, the Council, as you know, it will cease to exist. Are you prepared for that change?" The old Zephyrian thought about his people dying, while politicians argued about pride and protocol. He thought about the millions of refugees, fleeing from failed worlds, while their leaders refused to admit they needed help. He thought about the centuries of arrogance and prejudice that had brought the galaxy to this point of crisis. "Yes," Ancient Memory of Stars said firmly, I am prepared for that change. My people are prepared for it. Do what you must do. Jake Morrison nodded and activated his communication system. Within minutes, human ships were launching from stations throughout their territory. But these were not warships coming to fight the Shadow Fleet. They were diplomatic vessels carrying the tools and knowledge needed to complete the reprogramming process that Grace Martinez had begun. The operation took less than 6 hours. Human. Technicians worked alongside reprogrammed Shadow Fleet units to install new control systems in the robotic armada. The ships that had been destroying Council worlds suddenly stopped their attack and began broadcasting messages of peaceful intent. But the most dramatic moment came when Jake Morrison himself arrived at Nexus Prime aboard a simple transport ship. He walked into the emergency session of the Galactic Council carrying a datapad that contained the new charter for galactic governance. "The old council is dissolved," Jake announced to the assembled delegates. "Any species that wishes to participate in galactic civilization may join the new Confederation of Free Worlds as an equal member. There will be no hierarchy, no superior or inferior species, and no permanent ruling class. Every world will have a voice, and every voice will be heard." Council Speaker Harmony Prime of the Eternal Void demanded to know by what authority humans could dissolve a government that had existed for millennia. Jake Morrison's answer was simple and devastating. "By the authority of competence," he said quietly. "You have proven that you cannot govern effectively or protect your own people. We have proven that we can. The choice is yours. Join us as equals or continue failing alone." The Krex Empire chose pride over survival and retreated to their home world to face whatever challenges awaited them in isolation. The Valdari Collective pragmatically accepted the new order and began establishing diplomatic relations with human space. The Zephyrian Collective formally dissolved their council membership and petitioned to join humanity's confederation as founding partners. 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood in the assembly hall of the new Galactic Confederation and watched. Representatives from over 200 species worked together to solve the challenges facing their worlds. The Shadow Fleet had been transformed into a construction and exploration force that helped build new colonies and discover new resources. Trade flowed freely between systems that had never been connected before. Scientific research advanced at unprecedented rates as species shared knowledge instead of hoarding it. The old council chambers on Nexus Prime had been converted into a museum dedicated to the lessons of history. A simple plaque near the entrance carried a message that Jake Morrison had written himself. "Power without wisdom leads to failure. Cooperation with respect leads to prosperity. The choice between them defines the character of any civilization."